Thank you so much, Professor Janice, for sharing your experience and also the kind of work that Lewis and Clark is doing in terms of educating and preparing students to work on climate issues, sharing with us your curriculum, the issues, challenges, and also your future goals that you all have planned for. So thank you very much. With that, I would like to thank all the presenters once again. I'm sure it was very informative. It definitely was for me, but I could also see my dean and my colleague Nima listening to all the presenters very attentively with interest, because I think it is very important for all of us here at JSW Law. So with that, I now open the floor for any questions if you have. Just a reminder, we only have 15 minutes. Professor Janice has to leave at 3:30 sharp, so we have 15 minutes, so we will take in as many questions we can sort of fit in within that 15 minutes. So the floor is open.
Thanks, Eric. That is such a great question. And the answer is yes. It is a very different world. I've been at Lewis and Clark for 28 years, and it is a different world the past few years than it has been with regard to climate, particularly more recently. We just commissioned someone to do a study for us of foundation giving in the climate space, and the chart showed a dramatic increase in the interest. And many foundations are devoting more significant percentages of their funds. I will also say that, of course, as you all know, climate justice is obviously a very important funding goal for many foundations and individual donors. And any projects that do that and work on resilience and adaptation. But yes, we are seeing much more openness, in fact, even being approached by some donors, which had never happened before. Yeah.
Would the others also want to sort of answer Eric's question?
Yes, thank you. We do, in Canada, we have seen an increase in funders interested in climate, but I would say that the driver in Canada is really Indigenous rights. So both the federal government and the government of British Columbia provincially or subnationally committed to implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples a few years ago. And they've both created a new law that in a roundabout way commits to doing that. So making law consistent with the UN Declaration. So once you start talking about Indigenous authority across much of the landscape, because we actually have virtually no treaties in British Columbia, that is really the way. It's Indigenous communities asserting their jurisdiction over, in particular, water, glaciers, and their way of life that's going to see a huge impact on the way we do things in BC. In fact, we have several consent-based processes going on right now, particularly in relation to new mining projects. And so that's going to change drastically the way that we do colonial law in Canada.
Thank you, Professor Deborah. Jolene, Petra, would you like to also say?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, definitely. When my predecessor, who was the director of the center prior to her retirement, always found it extremely difficult to raise funds. But I have the reverse problem. I have the problem of trying to figure out how to use those funds in a way that is aligned with our that's aligned with our values as well as what we hope to achieve. So I'll leave it at that.
Petra?
Yeah, let me lower my hand first. Thank you. I would also say yes, from the UK perspective. So certainly after or in the run-up to COP26, there was the Energy Transition Council, which was a new initiative set up by the UK government, and they provide, for example, funding for developing countries specifically, working with many countries, I think around 30 in various regions of the world to achieve their energy transition. So it's a very specific focus. So it's less for research in that sense. It's really geared towards impactful work, applied research, I would say. That is what the majority of the funding is looking for, to achieve a certain project outcome.
I agree, Eric. I think being here and seeing all of the successes that you all have, and frankly, the very hard choices that you as a country have made to be carbon negative is extremely inspiring. And I think that sort of resilience and positive attitude and making hard choices as you have that will lead to benefits is very inspiring. And I know it's inspired you, Eric, in your work, and certainly has given me renewed hope for things that can happen positively. So this alone will allow me to bring back some happiness to my students who sometimes feel a little bit beat up, and also just people that we deal with in the United States. Yes, thank you.
Any questions from anyone? If not, then let me ask the panel members here. As I mentioned earlier, and I mean, like, you know, we've just started and launched our climate center just the day before, and as I mentioned earlier, our journey has just begun. So if you had any sort of advice to give to the JSW School of Law in running the Climate Change and Environmental Law Center successfully, it would be very nice to hear from all the four panel members. I'll let Deborah, do you want to start?
Certainly. Well, it's interesting. I have worked with Professor Sharing for a few years in helping to develop their negotiation in the environmental law course. And so through that process, the students have really loved doing that hands-on, very complex problem solving, as all environmental problems are. And so I think you'll see very quickly that as you start to bring in projects and work on projects, they aren't simple. And it's really important to keep that in mind, because we often think, oh, we can just write a legal opinion and then we'll help the organization or the client that has come to us for assistance. But it actually often balloons into something much larger. And that's a real opportunity. So it's sometimes annoying because we'd rather be doing something else. But at the same time, it's a real opportunity to make a significant difference and have many different examples and different kinds of projects for students to work on. So as you go about doing your first kinds of projects, just enjoy the complexity and understand that that's simply the nature of environmental law and climate as well. And then always then, as Janet was mentioning, drawing in students in different ways to work on the projects over time. And so the students could, in the environmental law course, work on something that then they could then dig into further within the environmental law clinic or the climate and environmental law clinic. So there's a really good opportunity to repurpose the learning opportunities as well as providing services to community organizations.
Thank you, Professor Deborah. Petra?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an excellent question. So I think what I found really important was to build the center as a community so that it's not one person center, but really bringing in different people who are leading different projects. And that also then contributes to situations where when you are overwhelmed by too many projects, which I think will be quite easily the case. And Jolene has also pointed that out already. So I think in that situation, it's very useful to have others who instill these projects with their energy and to keep them going. And I also think it's very important to work with others, not to have these collaborative links and extending beyond our own countries and not just within universities, certainly, but extending to business partners, but also to other centers and working with others to keep this conversation going that you have started. I think that's a fascinating approach.
Thank you. Jolene?
I don't purport to have any advice. I think that one thing that really struck me as being such a valuable thing about having a center in Bhutan is what you can bring to the region, and what and also just perhaps, if that's the case, then kind of really connecting with the region. There are a lot of things happening in the region in terms of a lot of collaboration, many different law centers, universities, law schools, philanthropic initiatives, etc. It's a really, there's a lot happening, but it's also a region. Asia is also a region where that we have tremendous environmental and climate change challenges. The back row on the use of coal in the last year has been staggering. It's the work, and there's a lot of work to be done in the region, and I do look forward to hopefully being able to in any way help to bring your work to the region, and hopefully also work together to strengthen environmental rule of law in this in Asia.
Thank you, Jolene. We look forward to such kind of collaboration in the future. And last but not the least again, Professor
My advice is very practical. The clinics run on a school term. So fall semester, spring semester, real climate change work doesn't know any bounds, does it? And so my advice would be to be sure to have projects that fit well within a school term, not necessarily that they'll be begun and ended in the school term, but that students can at least feel they're making some progress. But understanding that you may need some long-term projects that don't depend on the semester so much, that need research and work all the time, so that your students always have steady, important work that doesn't necessarily have deadlines that don't match your terms, in addition to work that is current, emerging, more urgent, that may or may not fit within the term. But we keep having to remind ourselves, we're a clinic at a school. We're not a separate NGO that doesn't have students coming and going. So my advice is get a good mix of cases, long-term and short-term, that your students feel they're learning something in that time period.
Thank you so much for all the advices and the tips. I think this is only not useful for the center and the upcoming environmental law clinic, but also the existing clinics that we have at the law school currently. So with that, I think we come to the end of the session. Professor Janice has to leave, so thank you all very much. Thank you to all the panel members and to all the audiences for being here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.